By now, you've probably heard of the problem with plastic pollution in the ocean and plastic pollution on land, to be honest. Plastic pollution is everywhere. It's in our air, it's in our blood. It is a huge health problem as well as an environmental problem. It's one of the top two problems after climate change in the world. It's an epidemic, essentially. If you want to know what's being done about that, then this is the episode that you want to listen to, because we have Oceanic Canada's Anthony Marente, the senior campaigner for Oceanic Canada, here to talk about the upcoming meeting in Ottawa called INC4 as part of the Global Plastic Treaty by the UN. We're going to talk about the history of the Global Plastic Treaty and what's happened at the meetings before that, the other three meetings before that. This is the fourth meeting. We're going to find out what's going on here, what are the expectations, and what we hope to happen at this meeting. On this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast, let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin. This is a podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, like I mentioned before, we are very fortunate to have senior campaigner Anthony Marente from Oceanic Canada here to talk about what the expectations are, what the hopes are for this upcoming INC meeting as part of the UN Global Plastic Treaty. This is the fourth meeting that's happened. Anthony gives us a history of what's happened before at the other three meetings, how the Kenya meeting, the last meeting, got a little derailed by about 10 what he calls low ambitious countries in terms of getting the plastic treaty done properly and done at all, because they have other, fossil fuel and petroleum products and petroleum countries. They're essentially run by petroleum. And he's, talks about how their influence and how they are kind of, derailing the talks a little bit with all these different options. We're talking about how they did that. He's going to talk about what to expect this meeting, his role, as well as Oceanic Canada's and other campaigners' role, and the fact that this is an international meeting and how a lot of people from different nonprofit organizations, whether they be from environmental nonprofits or health nonprofits, are coming together to talk to governments about what they need to do to get this treaty gone and get this treaty done. And also Canada's role and the important role that Canada has in leading this meeting and the opportunities that are there for Canada on the global scale. So we're going to talk about all this wonderful stuff. So here is Anthony Marente talking about the UN Global Treaty meeting, INC4, that's going to happen this week in Ottawa. Here he is. Enjoy the interview, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Anthony, welcome back to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to continue to talk about the plastic pollution, and the UN Treaty on Plastics?
Let's dive into it. More than ready.
Awesome. I mean, this is a pretty important part of history. If you think about it, this meeting that's coming out, I believe it's called INC4. It's all about the UN plastic treaty. The discussions have been going on. I believe it was once in Kenya. I'm not sure where the other place. I'm sure you'll fill us in where it was before. But the idea is it's going to be an international treaty for plastics and how to deal with plastic pollution in the future. Obviously, Anthony, last time you were on, we talked about plastics in Canada and why there was a decision like the Supreme Court, or not Supreme, but it was there was a court decision saying that, oh, hold on a second, the government can't just say all plastics are toxic, even though they probably are in some sort of way. But, we talked about the ramifications of that and why certain companies wanted that to be said and why other companies didn't. And then, there's going to be an appeal process on that. It's already underway. But here we're talking about plastics in general. We're going to look at Canada, but also internationally, and why this meeting is so important, because it's happening in Montreal, or happening in Ottawa, I believe, and why that's so important, and Oceanic Canada's role in that stuff. So we're going to get into all of that. Looking forward to that. But Anthony, before we do, can you just remind people of who you are and what you do?
I'm Anthony Marente. I'm the senior plastics campaigner based in Toronto, Ontario, for Oceanic Canada, which is a branch of the international organization Oceana, the world's largest oceans-focused conservation group.
Nice. Wonderful. Okay, so let's talk about the UN treaty in general and kind of give the audience sort of an idea of what this treaty is, what it's planning on doing.
Oh, the Global Plastic Treaty. Okay. So I think for anyone listening, we kind of have to step back and really think about how we got to this place and how countries decided they actually want to fight plastic pollution. So
Right.
I think anyone listening can agree plastic, when it's in the environment, it's not good. You have seen countless news reports. You have seen in your own life when you're walking along the beach of a river, of a lake, of the ocean, if you're walking on a trail through the forest, if you're hiking the mountains, almost nothing is pristine anymore.
Right.
You can see plastic pollution everywhere. It's a bottle cap, it's a bag, it's a little piece of plastic snapped off of something. You have no idea where it came from. Plastic pollution is everywhere, and globally, that is common. We are not unique to that in Canada. And because of that, people are really starting to take notice. The UN in general has made the announcement that plastic pollution is the second most important planetary crisis behind climate change.
Wow.
And those two things are extremely connected. Plastic is a byproduct of oil and gas, and climate change is the largest threat facing the planet. And what's the largest contribution of climate change? That is oil and gas development and emissions from the oil and gas sector. So these two things, problem 1 and 2, are basically merged with each other. So what happened was there's a lot of acronyms involved in explaining to this. So I'm going to apologize to anyone listening. Feel free to jump back to right now when I'm going to say the long form of all of them. So the United Nations Environmental Assembly, sometimes called UNEA, they got together in Kenya and they came to the conclusion that as the United Nations, they should end plastic pollution. They have called their member states and delegates to come up with what they would call an instrument, what anyone else would call a treaty,
right,
to end plastic pollution. And they basically came to the conclusion that they should create an instrument that is legally binding, that includes all nations, to end plastic pollution, specifically in the marine environment. And that was their resolution.
Okay.
This, in order to achieve that, though, you can't just do that overnight. It requires a lot of negotiation. Plastics are a very big industry. It's not just the product you have on the shelf. It's not just the bag of chips. It's oil and gas refinement. It's the development of that oil and gas into a plastic product. What countries make that? Who ships them out? Who buys them? Who disposes of it? Where does it go when it's sold? It's a global issue. Nothing is insular. Nothing is within one member state of the UN. Everything is very interconnected. So from that, the United Nations said, all right, you all need to get together and talk about this and develop what this instrument or a treaty will be. So they resolved to meet 5 times, and they called this INC, INC, which stands for the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee. Okay. So in a lot of times when you search Global Plastic Treaty, you're going to see the acronyms INC1, INC2, INC3. Right. That is the first meeting of the International Negotiating Committee. That's INC1, INC2, 3, 4.
Gotcha.
7. The first one was in Paraguay, where they said, it was really nice that we decided we want to end plastic pollution in the oceans, but this problem's bigger. It should actually be plastic pollution everywhere.
Yeah.
But also the marine environment. That was the big outcome that came out of Paraguay is really the scope. Right. And they also in Paraguay came to the conclusion that should this be to end plastic pollution, reduce plastic pollution, prevent plastic pollution? Mm-hmm. They ultimately came to the decision that the ambition and the goal and scale of this should be to end plastic pollution. And those were the main outcomes there. There was a lot of talk, a lot of debate. It was the early days of what a treaty would look like. These conversations then moved over into France, where they hosted INC4. Mm-hmm. And in INC4, you then saw that there was a split in country ambition here. So you have a global plastic treaty, right? There's a lot of money involved in plastics. It's a backbone of economy for a lot of countries.
Right.
And with that, you started to see countries, it's a really nice idea that we want to end plastic pollution, but how we do that, these have implications on our finances. These have implications on our environments. And different countries have different stakes in both the environmental side of it, the people side of it, and the money side of it. So you started to see basically 3 pools of thought happening. You have what is considered high ambition. These are countries that want to end plastic pollution. They want to end plastic pollution by doing really, I think, simple things. These are bans, prohibitions. These are phase outs of plastics. These are bringing back refill and reuse. These are clear data transparency, caps on production. Really high ambition stuff. You have another pool of thought that says the exact opposite. We should basically keep making plastic as much as we want, but what we should really focus on is make sure that it doesn't get in the environment afterwards.
Okay.
A really downstream solution-oriented approach to this. That is what I would consider low ambition.
Yeah.
Then you have this third pool of thought that kind of lives somewhere in the middle. It's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, but they're not too decisive on it.
Right.
And in Paris, in France, at INC2, you start to see these countries kind of pick the pool that they wanted to be in. Canada, I'm happy to say, was in high ambition.
Okay.
They were really for that.
How many, were there a lot of countries in the low ambition? What was the proportion?
No, and this is where it's really interesting. You have over 160 countries debating at the Global Plastic Treaty. I would say, in that low ambition pool, that are really, we're going to say, stalling the treaty and making it really difficult to negotiate. Because the UN is all about, let's find commonality, let's find consensus, not majority rules.
Right.
So when you have a group of people that are low ambition, you kind of have to pull them out of that pool or meet them a little bit somewhere in the middle. No, very few countries, I would say maybe 10 are living in that low ambition.
Out of 160, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, very low.
Yeah.
And those low ambition countries are Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, many of the Gulf states. So you'll have Oman, you'll have Bahrain, you'll have Yemen.
Okay.
And then you also have countries like India, China, and the United States, and Argentina will be in those because I can't speak for those countries. I'm not an international negotiator for them, but those countries do have very large plastic and oil and gas industries.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like, yeah.
A cap on production would financially hurt them. But what you also have emerging are countries that do produce a lot of oil and gas that are on the high emission side. You have Canada, you have Norway, you have the United Kingdom. These are large oil and gas producing countries that are standing to say, nope, we are prioritizing the planet here. The things that they're selecting are good for it. So I would say the vast majority of the countries are in the high ambition. And then you have the countries that are in the middle. I would only put them in the middle because they just haven't been very vocal about either side of it. And that could just be because their negotiators are new to the process. Some countries have a lack of capacity. Generally, the global north countries or countries that are considered more wealthy have more resources and capacity to put behind these treaty negotiations and giving people the means and expertise and access to knowledge and resources to be really well equipped to be a key negotiator. So you're seeing that arrive from a lot of the key countries, but you do have a lot of stars popping out too. Fiji is a huge star. Mexico is a star in these negotiations. Nice. Rwanda is a big star in these negotiations. They're loud, vocal, they're speaking for people on the planet. It's really nice to see.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, so continuing on the journey of INCs, we went from France, then we went over to Kenya.
Right.
And that's where I would probably say, as someone observing and participating in these negotiations, things went a little off the rails.
Oh, no. Okay.
Where we saw this break in opinion about how to approach a unified, legally binding global plastic treaty to end plastic pollution. You then started seeing a new tactic that wasn't just stalling the negotiation process by disagreeing with each other, speaking over each other, something very out of a C-SPAN broadcast of a political debate. You started seeing countries introduce a new tactic, which was, okay, maybe under each approach, let's add 10, 15, 20 different options so that not only do we need to negotiate the purpose of this treaty, but each line we have to pick what sentence what ambition in the sentence, the grammar of it, it's very tedious.
Right.
It's a very interesting tactic, but it's basically, let's just flood the draft treaty, what this final text of the treaty would look like. Let's just flood it with options so that we have to spend all of our time talking about the words within it rather than actually talking about what's the purpose, what's the substantive part of these treaties. So
how do we make it effective, right?
How do we make it effective, and how do we actually get it to its final version?
Yeah.
And this is how Kenya ended. It ended with a draft. They went to Kenya with a draft treaty that was 70 pages long, and they left with a draft treaty that was 100 pages long.
Oh, wow. So added words and options and exceptions, and
which, if you're a negotiator, this just makes it even worse. Picture any group project that you're working on, and you send over draft 1, and draft 2 comes back, and it's triple the size, and you need to.
It's not supposed to be that way.
And you have a word limit. You got to get it down.
Now, was it the same? Was it the same sort of low ambitious countries that were adding these words and adding these options, or was it like more in the middle that we're kind of leaning towards these types of options?
No, you are seeing these low ambition countries kind of work collaboratively together. They're working collaboratively together. They're using similar language. They're agreeing with each other. They're supporting each other in the tactics of adding more options, deleting options, strong disagreement with options put forward from high ambition countries. They are sticking together as a unit, and they are quite well coordinated, but so are the high ambition countries. They're also very well coordinated. They support each other.
Yeah.
So
does it matter with some of the countries you mentioned, like the US, Russia? Those are pretty big countries that typically have in other sort of topic areas in the UN have a big influence on how things are proposed and how things get voted on and even negotiated. And say like when it comes down to security and war tactics and things like that, do they have the same type of influence, in this type of treaty negotiation?
I wouldn't say to the same powers as you do see, like the UN has a Security Council where you have countries that have veto votes.
Right.
But in the UN's environmental program, every country's vote is equal to another country's vote.
Okay.
But your biggest roadblock in the environmental program of the UN is that they are consensus driven. So they do need buy-in from everyone.
Right.
They do have the ability to vote and reject or accept things. But the goal of the UN generally on issues like this is that if it is truly a global problem that is dire, then everyone should be on board with it.
Right.
So you're hit with this existential question of, is plastic pollution a problem that 120 countries can agree on and work together, and we can exclude these other, we'll say 40 countries that are not on the same page as us. We completely exclude them from the process. We vote out all of their options. We ignore them. That would be a very strong, ambitious treaty, but it would exclude some of the largest plastic producing countries in the world.
Yeah.
Or the trade-off is, do we make a weaker treaty that only has a few provisional things, but everyone is involved?
Right.
And that's the issue that a lot of these negotiators are grappling with. Do we lower our ambition to meet these low ambition countries where they are, or do we drop them entirely, or do we work it out to try to get to something in the middle? And really, that's the core of what INC4 in Ottawa from April 23rd to 29th is going to be. That is the core question: is are we going to see delegates lower their ambition to meet these low ambition countries and make something in the middle and move this process forward? Or are we going to start seeing downvoting and saying, listen, you're not going to play with us in this field. We got to move forward on this. This is too pressing of an issue. goodbye. If you're not going to come up with us on this journey,
Yeah.
you got to be left behind. And to that, this is one of the really important things about these INCs and the gatherings and the resolution to make a global plastic treaty. When they came up with the idea to make a global plastic treaty, they underscored it that this is an urgent matter. And they, in that resolution to make a global plastic treaty, they said it must be done by the end of 2024.
Right.
We're nowhere near done. It's 2024.
That's always nice to hear.
The only meeting of countries to have another round of negotiations on this is in the fall of 2024 in Korea. There is a lot of pressure on Ottawa to be productive, to move things forward. So that's where we're at right now.
Gotcha.
We're at a group of kids playing in the playground. A small group of kids do not want to play, and you have just someone has to rally them together, and that playground is Ottawa. And let's see if Canadians can be the teacher that gets everyone to get along. That's kind of where we're at.
Gotcha. Now, I appreciate you going through sort of the history of this, because there's been a lot going on over the last couple of years in terms of these meetings. It's nice to get sort of the understanding and the history at each meeting and understanding where we're at coming into this meeting. And that's what I wanted out of this interview. I find it really interesting. Like, it's these meetings have happened all around the world, and having a meeting in Ottawa in Canada is really important. I feel like to Canadians, Ottawa has already proposed, as we've discussed before, plastic legislation, how to deal with plastic pollution and recycling, and we've seen a single-use plastic ban for specific items, which we talked about in the last episode. So it seems like Canada's trying to be a leader in this space, and having this meeting here and at the sort of the precipice of where we're at and where we need to go by Korea in the fall, and then having this legislation supposedly done at the end. What role is Canada expected to play? And is it from government, sort of like the ministry, like say the Department of Environment and Climate Change? Like, what role are Canadians expected to play? And is it at a government level? Is it at, say, like the nonprofit organization level, the private company level, or is it just everybody together from a Canadian perspective to get this driven home?
I think we should start with the symbolic nature of Ottawa hosting this.
Okay.
As you said, Canada has tried to be a global leader in fighting plastic pollution. Plastic ban. There were regulations coming in the pipeline for recycled content, for reuse, for cutting plastic in grocery stores, for truth and transparency about labeling like recyclable or compostable or biodegradable.
Right.
There were a lot of regulations coming out to curb plastic pollution in Canada. But what happened? Industry opposed that legislation, those regulations going forward, that federal approach to actually have an impact on plastic pollution. Industry stopped it. And by industry, I mean plastic and oil and gas. You had impure oil, Nova Chemical, Dow Chemical. You had intervention and meddling from the American Petrochemical Association and from the American Chemistry Council. Now, that's what happened in Canada. And that is just a microcosm, a small version of what is happening at the UN. You have high ambition governments trying to stop plastic pollution by doing a lot of these upstream ambitious measures, caps on plastic pollution, the phasing out of the plastics we know go to landfill or directly to the environment or are just burned. We have governments that are acknowledging recycling will not save us. We need to stop putting all of our eggs in this basket. For the past 50 years, it hasn't worked. Stop trying to make this work. But what is happening is you have countries that are oil and gas states meddling, and intervening and blocking progress. You have oil companies present at the negotiations, lobbying and stopping progress, warning countries that their economies will fail if they support this. You have those same companies there. When people think that the UN is just countries negotiating against countries. That's not true. I, as civil society and as an environmental group, I attend and observe, and I speak to governments, and I speak to people about the need for this ambitious treaty, and I push them to do better. Likewise, there are representatives from large companies, companies that are very well known, very well branded. You have companies that are not very well known, not very well branded, but produce all the plastic that we have. Esso, Husky, Shell, BP. You have state-owned oil companies in Saudi Arabia, in Brazil, in Argentina, in the UK, in Russia. And they're there, and they're lobbying against this plastic pollution treaty. So Ottawa is really symbolic in this, that we are a country that is trying to fight plastic pollution, and industry is not bringing us on that journey. They are not putting forward solutions. They are merely trying to hinder progress. I would be ecstatic if Dow Chemical, if Imperial Oil, of Nova Chemical, all of a sudden one day just said, we're introducing reuse and refill across the country. I know we stopped a lot of the good work in our courts and our legal challenge because we didn't think that was the right approach. So here's the approach we're taking. It's actually going to have an impact.
Right.
That hasn't happened. And if I were to be a betting man, I would probably bet that they will not do that because that impacts their bottom line.
Yeah.
For that same reason, these countries are stalling the progress on a global plastic pollution treaty. It is a dire crisis. So it's very interesting that a country that is experiencing that threat domestically is hosting this important international event that is facing that exact same threat. So I want to underscore that I think that's the important thing about Ottawa is we've felt this. Ottawa has felt this. So they are well poised to host this. Who is expected to move these negotiations forward while Ottawa hosts it? It's not like all pressure falls on Canada to do this. Canada is the host country. It is the UN that is to move this forward. Now, how can Ottawa play a good role in that? That is to our domestic leaders. We need to hear strong commitments coming from Prime Minister Trudeau when he is addressing the delegates at the UN and welcoming them there. We need to see strong, steadfast commitment from Minister Guilbeault when he is participating in panels, when he is meeting with heads of state, when he is meeting with his counterparts from countries like Brazil, like Mexico, like the United Kingdom, like Russia, like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, and like-minded countries like Norway. He needs to be able to show that domestically we can do this, we're trying to do this, that other member states within the UN are also on that page. And he needs to sit down and talk with the people who are making decisions and telling their negotiators to stall this process to change their mind.
Yeah, especially as much oil as we produce and fossil fuels as we produce, if we can send that strong message that might, look at it, the other countries might like that with the lower ambitious countries might be like, oh, okay, hold on a second. They're doing it too.
And the role is really lead by example. It's demonstrate that our economy can still survive, that there are alternatives, that you can implement reuse and refill, you can have national bans and it works. I think one of the most, this is very hyper local. I am in Toronto though. When people keep questioning, does a ban work? Does a ban work? People are like, oh, I have so many reusable bags under my sink. Canada sold 17 million single-use checkout bags before the ban annually. 17 billion, B.
B with a B, yeah.
With a B.
Yeah.
That is something like 20 to 30 single-use checkout bags each individual Canadian had. Unless you have something like 300 reusable bags under your sink a month, it's working.
Yeah.
The Don Valley cleanup crew, which is this big ravine river that's going through the heart of Toronto, they do an annual cleanup to get all the plastic trash that is collected in that valley. It's such a mess.
Yeah.
The last time they did a cleanup, post-ban, less than 5 plastic bags. That was one of the most common things that used to be stuck in trees, and then those got less than 5.
Yeah. That's a big difference.
To tell me a ban doesn't work is not true. Walk around. I don't see bags stuck in trees anymore. I don't see plastic straws lining the gutters of the streets. I don't see forks jammed everywhere. I am actually very disheartened to actually see a lot of restaurants that are bringing them back. It's uncertainty about the ban. I think that's not the way to go about it. But when the ban was strictly enforced and it was coming up, there was a huge market shift. I didn't see a lot of pollution, so it works.
Right.
So it's showing that global leadership. It's showing that domestic success story. It's showing that this is what people want. It's what Canadians want. It's what the global citizen wants.
Can I also say too about the reusable bags?
Yeah.
I mean, there's also like accountability on our own self. It's like, stop buying more reusable bags. Like, why do you need to buy all those bags? I keep 3 or 4 in my trunk.
Bring it back
when I go grocery shopping. It's it. That's the car I use to go. Like, it's not difficult. I mean, I've heard that argument before too, and I'm like, just stop buying the reusable bags and bring the ones like when you go grocery store. Right.
Here, I will say this. Every time someone tells me I have so many reusable bags under my sink, my first response is, well, why didn't you bring a bag when you went grocery shopping?
Yeah.
And they'll say, like, oh, it's not convenient to bring your own bag. And
oh my God.
You're carrying a purse, you're carrying a backpack, you're driving to a store. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Once you're done unloading your groceries, just go put the bag back in your trunk. Just put the bag back in your backpack.
Yeah.
Just restock it.
Yep.
It's a habit change.
Yeah, it is.
And I will say this to grocery stores that hand out reusable bags when they do at-home delivery.
Right.
Bring a crate for drop-off. And when there is a scheduled drop-off, have customers put the empty crate back outside.
Yes.
And collect it. Because if you are delivering a full crate of groceries, you can then put that empty crate, many empty crates actually, back in the truck and bring them back to the grocery store to be cleaned and then reuse them.
Yeah, it's not difficult.
That is a free idea. That is a
you're not going to charge for that. No worries.
Provigo, Safeway, take it.
Yeah.
Just start delivering your at-home delivery systems in a hard container that you ask customers to put out on their porch or in front of their door in their hallways when a delivery is scheduled. And then just take it back and wash it and then reuse it. It's not that hard. So
exactly.
Anyway, it is. So back to the gold.
Back to the
very local thing. No, I think Canada just really needs to demonstrate leadership through it. And I mean, this is not, I think every government should be held to account. I think they should always be pushed for higher ambition here. But I think one of the big things when we're thinking about domestic action in Canada and who is really this leader in Canada, it does fall on the Minister of Environment.
Right.
Global plastic treaty negotiations, as well as domestic action on plastic pollution, that falls on Minister Guilbeault.
Right.
He's been decided as that's his file.
Yeah.
It falls under him. But as we are learning about the harms of plastic pollution, how you're starting to see a lot of news report. This is really very concerning. That we have microplastics in our blood. We have microplastics in the air, so it's in our lungs. We are seeing that microplastics are being passed on to unborn children. If a woman is pregnant, it's going from placenta to child.
Right.
We're also learning what those microplastics and the chemicals that are in those microplastics are doing. News reports are coming out that they are linked to cancers. They are linked to respiratory illnesses. They are linked to chronic inflammation, gut issues, skeletal issues, muscular issues. There's a study that shows that it helps proliferate and advance Alzheimer's. There are studies that show that it has endocrine disruption, which is hormone disruption in people. And there are studies that show that it leads to infertility, that it makes sperm immobile, reduces sperm count, and it's being passed over from the placenta to an unborn child. So if that unborn child is going to be a baby girl, this is really interesting. This comes from the Canadian Associations for Physicians for the Environment, CAPE. One of their doctors recently did a presser where she explained that for women and girls, they're born with all of the eggs that they'll ever have. Gotcha. So if plastic pollution is in the mother and it's being passed on to a daughter, before she's even born, it's not only the current generation and the one that's about to be born, but it's the one after that.
Right.
Because if there's plastic pollution being passed on through the blood from mother to unborn, we'll say if it's going to be a daughter.
Yeah.
That daughter is then her eggs are impacted because they're born with it.
Right.
So it's this triple generational impact that's happening at any given moment. So it's really important that not only is Environment Climate Change Canada on this file, I think that this should also be well followed and
Hmm.
participated in by Health Canada. It should be participated in by Indigenous Services and Affairs Canada, because you have a lot of these petrochemical plants that are being built next to Indigenous communities. And it really threatens things like food and water sovereignty when you have a petrochemical plant that is leaking fumes and
Yeah.
pollutants into water, into soil, into air next to communities. That is a health issue. That's a community issue. That is
Yeah.
going against what the federal government has a lot of commitments to protect and uplift Indigenous peoples in Canada. So there is so much pressure on one department, on Environment Climate Change Canada. And again, as I said, I think governments should always be pushed to do better.
Yeah.
We should expand the scope at which Canada is looking at that, and we should also be leading that charge so that other countries start bringing on their departments of health, their department
Right.
of affairs that are protecting and uplifting Indigenous peoples, because that is part of the treaty negotiation. Plastic pollution is not just an environmental problem, it is a people and environment problem, and the treaty has the ability to tackle both of those sides of
Yeah.
this coin, rather than just focusing on just the planet. Planet
Yeah.
is nothing without people.
Yeah. When we talk about, ocean conservation, ocean justice is a big pro. Climate justice is the same thing. So I would imagine the same. I mean, I know it's all means the same, but plastic justice is another one that, it's all encompassing because, as you mentioned, fossil fuels are involved in the creation of these plastics. You're looking at refineries, you're looking at, warehouses that emit this type of pollution beside indigenous neighborhoods, beside indigenous land and other, areas of minorities. We've heard in the U.S. A number of times is a great example of chemical, and then we have Chemical Alley just in Ontario itself, right? And being able to protect the people who live there from those types of viruses and diseases that are killers essentially is important, and it's a responsibility of the government as well as private stakeholders. We know that nonprofit organizations, ENGOs, as well as health NGOs are probably involved in this as well. But it really comes down to the businesses that profit from this, but they're also profiting on the backs of Canadians' health as well as other people in the world, their health as well, right?
Yeah, I'm really heartened by the fact that a lot of environmental groups that maybe historically have only looked at environmental health, environmental
Hmm.
protection, have really started expanding their scope.
Right.
There's a lot of good groups like Environmental Defense Canada, David Suzuki Foundation, Eco Justice Canada have expanded the scope to see the full life cycle of plastics. It impacts people.
Right.
It impacts communities. And one of the most interesting things about participating in these global plastic treaty negotiations is this coalition of international groups that have come together, and they have brought these people together. They brought Indigenous leaders. They have brought the informal waste picking sector. They have brought physicians. They have brought nurses and healthcare workers. They have brought waste management people together, because everyone in almost every industry is seeing plastic pollution impact them in a different way. And everyone has come to realize that we need to stop this thing at the source.
Yeah.
Is all these downstream solutions are only going to work for one person, and that is the CEO of a lot of large plastic companies.
Right. Right.
Those are the people that are really going to benefit from increased recycling. But it's the production of oil and gas. It's the manufacturing of plastics from petrochemicals. It's the shipment of petrochemicals and resins and plastic products across borders that are impacting people. So we have Cancer Alley in Ontario. We have Chemical Alley in Ontario. You have Cancer Alley in the US. You have these several states where there are Black and Brown communities that are abutting these massive petrochemical facilities, and their cancer rates are insanely high compared to everywhere else. And then you have these small island states that are just receiving shipping containers of garbage from the global north, and you're seeing these narratives being put on the news and in articles, and I hate when I even see environmental groups sharing it, that all plastic pollution comes from 5 rivers in Africa and Asia, and it's like, where do you think that plastic came from?
Right.
It's North America and Europe are shipping our garbage to them. There's a lot of illegal waste trade that is happening, and it's just being sent because another country is saying that they'll recycle it, and when they find out they're not actually recycling it, the chain of accountability stops at, you said you'll recycle it, thank you, I'm done.
Yeah,
And they wash their hands of it, and they say, oh,
it's
I'll
on you
report that
now
I
to
sent it.
recycle.
Yeah, and what do you see? You see rivers that are just absolutely inundated with plastic pollution. But if you look at the labels are they're not written in the language in the country in which they're sold. They're generally written in other languages. Those are countries that are shipping them to them. So, it is a global problem. It's exciting to see not just governments coming together, but people coming together to push their governments, to push international governments to fight plastic pollution. And I'm really hopeful and excited about what's going to happen in Ottawa. Talk to me after when it's done. We'll see if I'm still hopeful and optimistic. But
well, that's the plan. We'll definitely chat with you, Anthony, afterwards, because that'll be a big thing. It'll be either deflating or a big call to action to just be like, hey, look, this is how far we got, or it went in the wrong direction again, and we need to curtail this, and here's how to do it. And I think it's a big ask for this meeting. There seem to be a lot of big gaps that have been left open, and some things that need to be rewritten, hopefully in less words than before, and to be able to get that. So, looking at going into this meeting, are you optimistic about this meeting, or are you worried that these sort of 10 unambitious or low ambitious countries are going to take over the meeting?
I am optimistic. It's optimistic to see on the UN plenary floor that the vast majority of the world is for fighting plastic pollution.
Right.
They are not only for it, they are for it in advanced, sophisticated, and actually impactful ways. There have been calls for a cap on primary plastic production. There have been calls for a phasing out of plastic materials that are non-recyclable. We know them to go into landfill, incineration, or directly to the environment. There has been a call to identify chemicals of concern. Those are the chemicals and the additives being put into plastic products to make them flexible, to make them water resistant, to make them melt resistant. But we know that those chemicals and those additives are linked to human health concerns, like cancers, like respiratory illnesses, like hormone disruption. We have heard calls for full transparency on what is being added in plastic products. You would be hard pressed right now to pick up a plastic product, and there would be a list of every chemical that is involved in that process and the risk associated with those chemicals.
Yeah. Is there enough room on the bottles or on the actual containers? Probably not.
No. That would be, the labeling would get crazy from that. But this is why it's important to identify what those chemicals are, the risks they have to human health, and to eliminate them from the process off the bat, because there is no room on the label for it. There is no accountability. Any country right now that has labeling requirements for plastic packaging, especially the ones that go to your food, it's voluntary.
Right.
And let me tell you, a lot of plastic packaging companies and plastic manufacturers are not putting the chemical composition of their plastic products on there.
No. Yeah.
At best, you will see the resin number. That is the type of plastic that it is. That is a little chasing arrow symbol with a number, or you'll see words like PP for polypropylene, or PE for polyethylene, or PET for polyethylene tetrahydride. PVC is polyvinyl chloride. So you'll see at best that light level of transparency, but you will not see the human health risk involved in it. And you've also seen a call from countries to not rely on recycling, to not rely on burning plastic waste, to not rely on these downstream end-of-life measures to deal with this problem. You have also seen really strong calls to finance the just transition, moving away from plastics, and cleanups that are required for this legacy plastic in the environment. And that financing has been called from the global north, the countries that can afford it, and not putting the burden on the global south, which is traditionally how we've seen waste management happen. We've seen countries like Thailand and Indonesia and the Philippines be stuck with plastic pollution, these small island states that are still developing, that have economies that need to deal with waste because they don't have a ton of resources to
Yeah.
export or make trade deals. They're left at these downstream measures for waste management. They're taking the brunt of this plastic pollution burden, and their people are feeling it. Their environment is feeling it. The world's biodiversity is feeling it. A lot of these places, highest concentrations of coral reefs are, where sharks are, where huge fisheries are being inundated with plastic pollution. So we're seeing calls for really good, impactful ways to deal with plastic pollution from the vast majority of countries. And I'm hopeful that in Ottawa, we can get to a point where these low ambition countries do not stall this going forward, and that we move towards a final product, a final legally binding international global plastic treaty that holds countries to account and caps plastic pollution.
Awesome. That would definitely be wonderful. Now, Anthony, just sort of the last kind of questions, set of questions here is for you as a senior campaigner for Oceanic Canada. Obviously, there's going to be other NGOs there, not only from Canada but from all over the world, including some of your affiliates in other countries, of Oceanic that are going to be there. As a campaigner, what is your role when you go there, and what do you hope to accomplish, or like sort of your task that what you're gonna do?
First and foremost, my role is to make sure that what is happening at the UN is being publicized. That when the government of Canada speaks and issues their stance on plastic pollution and the ways in which they want to fight it, that is public knowledge, so that the government knows we have eyes on you. So stay ambitious, stay pushing these upstream measures that are actually going to have impact and protect people and the planet. That is my first and foremost goal, to make sure that the government knows there are eyes on them. My second then is to meet with government, to meet with industry, to meet with other civil society groups, to make sure that we are aligned, that we are on the same page, that we are asking for the same things, that we are pushing for high ambition. When I hear my country stand up and say that they are lost, they need more information, they need better resources to make a stronger decision or stance on things like capping plastic pollution, things like phasing out chemicals of concern, things like developing a science council on the best state of plastic knowledge or plastic research. That is then my role to step in and make sure that they are equipped with that. This global network of environmental and human health rights groups coming together is a vast resource that I have access to.
Yeah.
And government doesn't necessarily have access to that. I, through networking, through collaborative work, have access to human health studies from all around the world that are translated into English that I can provide my government. I have examples of source reduction projects, of reuse projects around the world, laws around the world that are effective, or even ones that are non-effective. And I can bring that to my government so that when they are trying to make decisions and they are weighing pros and cons of stances or approaches to fighting plastic pollution, that they're well informed, they're well equipped, and they know what Canadians want. It is my job as an environmental group to make sure that I am speaking to people, that I am doing public polling, that I'm doing surveys, and I know what Canadians are asking. I know what they're concerned about, and I'm bringing that to the government's attention. Without me being there, without other civil society groups being there, and I'm so happy that so many are attending in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Obviously, because it's in Canada, it's far more accessible to Canadian groups to attend this one. We are at a benefit that we can tell our governments this, that we can share this information, that we have the resources to not only collect that information, but to travel and go to it.
Yeah.
Other countries don't have that benefit.
Right.
Environmental groups generally are lower budget. We're on a shoestring budget. We're charities. We depend on funding from people and foundations. Our capacity is low, and we're a Canadian group, that we have good resources, good support. We have a good global network we can rely on. And I am just so heartened and encouraged by seeing these groups that are coming out from Tanzania, that are coming out from Fiji, that are coming out from Cameroon, that are coming from Rwanda, that are coming from Brazil, that are coming from Venezuela. And they're coming from these countries that they don't have a lot of resources, but they are there fighting for it. They are making sure their government is not falling to the wayside on this issue, because they know how important it is for their people and for their environment. and they're fighting for it. And that's their role too. They're putting a lot of their resources and capacity to make sure their governments know that they're being watched and that they need to be accountable on what they are negotiating for at the treaty. So that in a nutshell is what I'm there to do.
Just small tasks, right? Small responsibility.
It's a small responsibility, but it's such a vital one. It always introduces the very, I think, interesting conversation of what's the carbon impact of everyone traveling to one part of the world to discuss climate impact. But then you realize that if you go to this one part of the world and everyone sits down and you talk about it, you share resources, you share knowledge, it can potentially create this huge globally binding measure that just protects the planet. We did it for cigarettes. Cigarettes and the tobacco industry are held to such huge regulations because of international work like this.
Yes.
The ozone layer
it's back.
It's back because of treaties like this, and plastic pollution and the climate crisis could be resolved using big global tactics like this. It just requires ambition, it requires effort and capacity.
And it inspires government action, right? As governments want to be leaders in specific aspects like plastic pollution control and reducing that impact, climate change, and so forth. So, and it's almost like a 2-for-1. If you reduce the plastic pollution, you probably reduce climate change pollution as well. So, it's kind of a bit of a 2 for it in the long run, indirectly. So that would be great too. But, Anthony, I want to thank you so much for joining us and spending time with us and kind of giving us expectations and what to expect in the history of all these meetings and where we're at and where we need to be. I'm looking forward to finding out what you have for us when we come back. Hopefully it'll be good news, and hopefully we'll see some impacts from these treaty meetings. And we appreciate the work that you do as well as your colleagues. So please let them know when you see them that we do appreciate, and they have the support of this audience and myself and everything you need to do. And whatever you need from us, just let us know. And we'd be more than happy to put out some more content on your behalf or whatever that might be. But we're looking forward to having that conversation afterwards.
And thank you for creating a community that is talking about this, is taking action towards this. I would give a call out to anyone listening to go to oceana.ca. We'll have all this information on our website where you could engage with local government, pushing for domestic international action at the Global Plastic Treaty, to keep going in these negotiations, to keep pressuring the plastic industry to bring forward solutions and not just more pollution. But this is something that we need to work on desperately. And I'm hopeful that this will resolve in something that can actually have an impact.
Great. I'm the same. I'm with you on this one. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, for joining us here on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you come by again to talk about plastic pollution, to talk about this global UN treaty. This is something that I feel is important for the future of handling plastic pollution. Canada has already put legislation together. It has been contested. A big court battle happened last year where, unfortunately, the government of Canada lost that court battle, but they're appealing that process. And it's great to have you to come here to give us all the details and what we need to know going into this meeting as citizens, whether you're a citizen of Canada, citizen of the US, the UK, Australia, India, Brazil. This is affecting everybody, and everybody needs to know what happens at these meetings, how these meetings work, and it was great for you to come by and do that. We are going to have Anthony back on the program after the meeting. Once he's decompressed from the meeting, it's going to be very intense for him as well as his colleagues as they do the great work that they do. But we're going to have him back on the podcast to be able to talk about what happened at the meeting. Was he correct? Was his expectations, seen through, or did it derail, or what have you? We're going to find out all those details when he comes back from those meetings. So keep in touch with the podcast. All you have to do is follow or subscribe, depending on what platform you're listening to. And of course, if you want to get to me and talk to me about your concerns, about your comments about this episode or any other episode, you can do so by DMing me on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. Don't forget to also, if you want to keep up to date on ocean news, what's happening, and also if you're looking for a career in ocean conservation, you can follow along and find new updates as we go along 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, with our newsletter. Go Go to speakupforblue.com/newsletter to find out more and sign up for that newsletter and get information to your inbox every day, Monday to Friday, to find out more about what's happening in the ocean. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for Anthony for joining us. And thank you for listening and sharing this podcast with people that you think are going to enjoy listening to this and want to stay in the know about what's happening in the ocean and how to protect it. So we thank you so much for joining on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.